Postcards from a Dying World, the podcast. For more than a decade, I've reviewed over 1,000 books that are mostly science fiction, horror, and bizarro. This feed will feature bonus audio I have produced over the years, as well as a monthly digest of reviews based on what I've read each month, plus the occasional bonus material about my own fiction. Thanks for listening. All right, welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. Today, I have a very special guest. And if you don't know me, I'm David Agranoff. I'm the author of the Splatterpunk Award-nominated Ring of Fire, Punk Rock Ghost Story, and recently released sci-fi novel Goddamn Killing Machines. This is a really awesome and important interview for me to do because probably my favorite writer on the planet and the person whose blending of science fiction and horror has been a huge inspiration to me is Cyberpunk Patient Zero, John Shirley, who's joining us today on Postcards from a Dying World. And we're going to talk about what he's been up to. And I promise you I'll have John back to do more career retrospective stuff, but I'm going to bring in the other John Shirley expert, Sean Lawton, to join me for that one. But today we're just going to focus on what's going on with John, your feelings in this pandemic world, because we haven't heard a lot from you lately. And I know you've been hard at work on an album. So welcome, John. Good to have you.
Good to be here.
All right. So you have been hard at work recently. And like, I know I've got John Shirley and the Screaming Geezers CD here, but is the record, some of the songs are similar, right? Or are they completely different? What's going on with this album that you just put out?
Some of the songs are the same as on this. What you have is a sampler album that we used basically to get gigs, but we also sent out some copies to people. Mm-hmm. And then the new album has some of those songs, and it has a whole bunch of new songs.
Yeah. Now
and here's the cover. I don't think you can make this out very well here.
Yeah. For those watching on YouTube.
Why does it look backwards?
I think it's backwards for you. It looks fine for me.
I am in that mirror world from Alice in Wonderland, so that's probably the reason. But yeah, that's basically the cover. Buck Dharma from Blue Oyster Cult told me he really liked this cover art.
Yeah, I think it's great. Who did the cover art for you?
A guy named Dan Sauer, who's S-A-U-E-R. He's in the it's very connected to the kind of Lovecraftian area and Weird Tales sort of area of illustrating. But he also does stuff like this. The back cover is a picture of us opening for the Blue Oyster Cult, in fact.
Yeah, and I do want to get back to that show because that sounded really, really cool. And I was super jealous of. Well, of course, I right after I leave Portland, you come back, which, like two ships passing in the night. But unfortunately, didn't get a chance to be able to see you play music on the regular because I moved back down here. But I got the impression that moving back up to the Pacific Northwest was in part to kind of restart this musical journey for you. Was that the intention from the beginning, or was it just that you missed the part of the region that you grew up in?
Why I moved back to the Portland area?
Yeah.
A variety of reasons, starting with the property taxes in California were getting higher and higher. And also cost of living there. And but also I had a kind of an elephant's graveyard desire to go back to the Pacific Northwest where I more or less grew up. I was going to move to Portland, but we wanted to buy a house with certain characteristics, and Portland was having a spike of real estate prices. So we picked Vancouver, Washington, just across the Columbia River from Portland. Mm-hmm. It's a very much a kind of Willamette Valley, Columbia Gorge sort of community, and very, very a lot of it is right on the edge of all this different pastoral countryside. So yeah, we got a good place there. We like it. We are able to buy a house at a reasonable price, and I have a lot of connections in Portland, where all these people I was in bands with way back in the day are still, playing music. And so I was able to cobble together a band with them, the Screaming Geezers. And we played a number of gigs. The band is kind of like post-punk with some garage influences, like we do a cover of a Sonics song by the Sonics, Strychnine. But also there's some modern influences like All Them Witches and Clutch is some semi-modern. So it's sort of in there somewhere. There's this sweet spot in there, but it's definitely interested in rocking. I feel like with the trouble with contemporary rock bands is that the majority of them don't know how to actually rock. It's not exactly the style of music they play, it's their attitude. They're playing kind of ironically. They rock ironically, and they're just like winking as they rock. Whereas we actually rock, we get into it. At the same time, we're making statements. The lyrics are meaningful.
Yeah, and I think that the energy is really, really strong on, at least on the sampler that I have. I really like the kind of the raw energy that you're bringing back to it. You can tell that you guys are excited to be playing together and playing with each other. Some of those connections, they do go back to Obsession and Sado-nation days, right? When you were playing in Portland back then, some of the musicians that you're working with.
Yeah, the drummer was my drummer from Sado-nation.
Great.
And the bass player, Mark Sten, who wrote the book All Ages about Portland punk rock and how it was like the genesis of things like grunge. He was in all kinds of things. He had his finger in everything in the early punk scene in Portland, Oregon, and was in bands with me then. And then Jimmy Haskett, the guitar player, was in Roz Rezbek's Theater of Sheep, which was kind of a classic amalgam of punk and glam rock and satire and all of that. He's a guy who can play any style, and so he's pretty great.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, because one of the things I was trying to do with my novel Punk Rock Ghost Story was to show the difference between punk rock before your Green Days and your Nirvanas made being weird and alternative, almost mainstream, and how different it was, and how much you had to do it for the love of the energy and because no one was rolling out money or providing venues for punk music in the early days. It was a DIY and for the love kind of art form.
Right, it was DIY. It really was.
Yeah, and so one of the things that's cool is you're talking about the guy from your band that I remember at World Horror in Portland. He was laying out the book for a couple of us that were hanging out, and we got to see, like, it was really great to see the grassroots of the early punk scene in Portland, because at the time it was 2014 and there's nothing. I mean, there's still grassroots and basement shows and stuff like that still go on today, but that was it for punk rock in those days. You guys were almost like on a frontier, doing this stuff with, you didn't have years of people doing it before you to show you how to do this. So you guys had to kind of figure out how you were going to make this genre happen. And I'm wondering if that experience back in the day is helping bring a fresh energy to what you guys are doing now. You know what I'm saying?
Well, sure it is. Uh, since then, you know, we've all absorbed a lot of musicianship and influences from various places, and we can play. We have one song that's basically a kind of dark country rock ballad, so we have a lot of different directions we can go in. But yes, I mean, it's it's like if you have a truck that runs on diesel, well, this truck is still running on diesel. You know, it's still burning that big, heavy, polluting fuel. And so, it's just has kind of, you know, got more intricate and a little more planned. I mean, we also are very interested in songcraft and the craftsmanship of writing songs. So, you know, we put together things that have a definite structure, but also will we have, like certain bands do, like the Velvet Underground used to do, the ability to play within these structures, and then the ability to just kind of go off into a strange, you know, a semi-improvisational wildness, like the Velvets used to do, for example, and few bands do anymore. Or, you know, you could give Hendrix as an example. He would do that, and then he would bring it back into the structure again. And so, you know, we like it's like we're taking you on an expedition or something out of, it's like you're going on a safari in Africa, and you're safe with your safari people, and then they take you out into the wilderness, and then they bring you safely back home. That's what we do.
Well, and I think that it's great because you guys have been friends and colleagues for so many years. You went off, you had different experiences, different artistic ventures. And I'm sure there's a shorthand for you guys coming back together that any musical attempts you've had in between probably didn't have, right? And I think that lends to great creativity.
Yeah, well, also we you know, we do some, at first we have certain covers that we do from, and some old songs that we do, like Our Love Is Like a Death Camp is a song from 1978 that I wrote with Mike King, and it's kind of a satirical, just attempt to outrage everybody possible, and very, it's sort of like Black Sabbath meets punk rock. And so we just, you know, that's one of the first things we played because we all know it, and it's really pretty simple. But it's a big jam up song too. And that's on the album. So that's kind of our roots thing we had. And then we also would do Iggy Pop covers, Iggy and the Stooges rather covers, like, you know, Loose, you know, by the Stooges, for example, and Down on the Streets by the Stooges, things from Funhouse, because they're relatively easy to learn and put together, but, you know, doing them convincingly is something else, and it's something we all had in common, and then we were able to cohere as a band doing these covers that we knew and doing a few old songs that we knew. And then from there we grew into writing original things and newer things. And you can hear all of that on the album.
Well, and you guys do Johnny Paranoid too, which is, I think that song has an incredible hook. So anybody that hears that song instantly gets like sucked in, because I think one of the things that makes that song so memorable is that the hook and the combination of the riff with the vocals, just it's instantly memorable, and that song is one that gets stuck in your head.
Yeah, and it is one we still play, and we played it while opening for the Blue Oyster Cult, and people seem to love it. you know,
I'm
we
telling you, that hook.
played a range of stuff, and there was 1,500 people at that show, which was the biggest show we'd played, and the place was completely full, the Roseland Theater. And and usually, you know, people are just kind of shrug off an opening act, but we got them from the beginning. We just had them. You know, we could just feel they were captivated and they loved us. And the Blue Oyster Cult said we were really good. So that was a big deal for me, you know, when Buck Dharma tells you, you know. And by the way, there's a new Blue Oyster Cult album coming in October with 5 songs that are my lyrics.
Well, right, and you have that relationship with Blue Oyster Cult.
Yeah, I've written a lot of songs for them. None of their big hits. It was after that time in their career, but I've written a lot of songs. I get paid by ASCAP for them sometimes, and the album is called "The Symbol Remains" from Frontier Records. So people who are fans of BOC will want to check that out in October. It'll be in all formats: vinyl and download and CD.
Yeah.
And this album, the Screaming Geezers album, will be in vinyl in a few weeks, a month maybe. Will be on CD in a few weeks. So if you want a CD of it, it'll be around. And then I'm going to arrange for downloads. But right now it's only on vinyl.
Well, and so playing that show, that had to be like kind of a moment where you felt like it was all coming together, and you know, for this group, and that had to be a really good feeling, especially to do with a band that you have such a great relationship with.
Yeah, and then suddenly COVID-19 happened right after that. That was in February.
Got it in.
And we had to cancel. We had a bunch of shows around Portland, and they were canceled. We canceled them, or the club did. All the clubs basically closed, and we weren't able to rehearse. You know, we still are not rehearsing, and that is an issue. You know, it's hard to keep your momentum going, but we're going to revive it as soon as there's a vaccine.
Well, hey, plenty of time for you guys to write ideas. And
yeah, we're going to start doing stuff on Zoom with one another.
Oh, good. All right, so we might talk a little bit more Screaming Geezers later, but I wanted to talk next about this issue of Weird Book #2, for those of you who are watching on the YouTube version. I'm holding it up. It's the John Shirley special issue, #42 of Weird Book, which is a great zine to begin with. And so this was the first fiction we've gotten in a little while. And it was great to, one of my favorites, I liked the short stories quite a bit in this one. You had 4 short stories, or 5 short stories and a short novel in here. And the Broken Wheel of Time short story, I absolutely love.
Broken on the Wheel of Time, yeah. It's a kind of a novel. It's a novelette length.
Yeah, and that one I really appreciated. And then that Ambulance, again, had kind of a Twilight Zone feel.
Mm-hmm.
That story. Can you tell us about writing Broken on the Wheel of Time, and where that one came from, and give a little pitch on that?
Well, I was asked to write a lot of Lovecraftian stories. I was one of those guys who read a lot of Lovecraft when I was a young person. And I used to order books from Arkham House when I was a teenager. So I said yes to these requests for Lovecraftian anthologies, many of them from S.T. Joshi, who wrote the definitive biography of Lovecraft. And I developed enough of those stories out, accumulated enough to make a story collection, and that the story collection is called Lovecraft Alive, and it came out from Hippocampus, which is S.T. Joshi's publishing company, and they publish a lot of weird tales, sort of inflected stuff, and I wanted to write an original piece for Lovecraft Alive, and that's it. That was it. It was Broken on the Wheel of Time, which is it's about Shadows Out of Time, I believe is the story, The Shadow of Time. That kind of whole Lovecraftian, one of his little mythos niches where he has these creatures that move through time and can sort of take over your body, and you can move back and be in their bodies, these truly alien bodies. And so is somebody in like the late 19th century, early 20th century discovering that they can do that, and mixed with people in our own time. And I think it's a really, what I do with Lovecraft, Lovecraftian stories, is I take something of his and I try to evoke the cosmic doom and everything else that he brings to it. But I also try to bring something new and to come at it from a different angle, like the same thing, the same ideas, but from a new angle. Just something fresh to really, really bring it alive. That's why it's called Lovecraft Alive, because I'm trying to enliven it instead of just writing knockoff Lovecraftian stories. I've seen a few too many of those around. So that's what I did. I tried to bring it alive from a whole new, fresh angle.
Well, which is the thing that makes the collection so great is that it does. I mean, you're good at doing the Lovecraft pastiche when you want to give that flavor, but the John Shirley ideas and the fresh concepts always bleed through in those stories and give them the edge that we're looking for to make it different. And what I think is happening a lot now with the mythos writing that's happening now is that people are so focused on having the conversation with Lovecraft's negative views, the racism, the ugly stuff, that we're getting more of that now than the straight cosmic dread in some regards. And what I liked about Broken on the Wheel of Time, for example, is that there is that kind of inherent terror in the movement outside of the universe kind of thing.
Yes.
And that's what I like about that story. I mean, not that there's anything, I think, Lovecraft Country being on HBO, confronting the racism of it, and Matt Ruff's novel, Victor LaValle doing that with Ballad of Black Tom, great stuff. But I think that it's good that there's lots of different ways to confront the Lovecraft vibe, is what I'm saying.
Yes, indeed. And Lovecraft Country, I was glad to see that they brought in the HBO thing also, Lovecraft's own racism. They just mentioned it, but they mentioned it in a very surgically incisive kind of way. Went on about some racist poetry he'd written and so on, and
less surgical in the novel Lovecraft Country, but well done.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure there's more, and they get into it more. And so, it's like, it's sort of like it's written. I think the novel's done by somebody who loves Lovecraft, but also wanted to turn it around and sort of flip that on Lovecraft himself in a way, and say, yes, but Howard, what about your racism? Well, here's what I'm doing with your stuff. And I did something like that in my story, Those Who Come to Dagon, which is in Lovecraft Alive. It was an anti-racist story, it had to do with slavery and so on. So I had that impulse too some years ago. So
the natural impulse when dealing with Lovecraft, for sure.
Another thing I was influenced by when I was a kid was, as so many people were, was sword and sorcery fiction and fantasy fiction, fantasy adventure fiction, everything from Robert E. Howard, to Clark Ashton Smith, to Fritz Lieber's Lankmar stories, to Michael Moorcock, to Tolkien. So there's kind of a spectrum there. And but I wrote a novella at the other end, of the earlier end of the spectrum, a little closer to Fritz Lieber and Robert E. Howard, which is in the Weird Book.
Yeah.
Called Swords of Atlantis. I later found out there's something called Swords of Atlantis somewhere. I think it's a video game or something. I'm not sure what it is. But no, it was an Aquaman thing. Apparently an Aquaman miniseries called that. So I'm going to be expanding Swords of Atlantis novella into a novel. And I'm changing the title to Sorcerer of Atlantis. And it is, but it tries to kind of revisit the excitement, the boyish excitement I felt reading Conan's stories and the Lankmore stories and other Lynn Carter and all, you know, that whole range, L. Sprague de Camp stories, and also it's influenced by Jack Vance too. There's a whole kind of picaresque, as they say, influence in it, where there's the character is a little bit of an anti-hero. He's a little bit of a blunderer in some ways. But he at the same time is growing and developing, and it's like I'm trying to get that Vancian sense of humor and wryness about human nature in there. And also one thing that makes this a little distinct indeed is that Swords of Atlantis has a sense of humor. It's not satirical, it's not parodying sword and sorcery. It just has some humor in it, the way Vance would often have humor in it, in his fantasy stuff. And it's a little bit kind of like you know, certain contemporary movie making and television a little bit in that they will have a sense of humor about things sometimes, and yet at the same time it can be scary. Well, not quite so far as Army of Darkness or something, but not quite that funny, but still there's humor in it. So that is a little bit bold because, you know, people take sword and sorcery and fantasy things. It's just kind of like the way it's redone now. People have no sense of humor, and their humor doesn't emerge in it. But so I did allow it, and I think it makes it more fun. But at the same time, it is a heroic action story.
Well, what I think is really good about Sword of Atlantis, and we've seen you hint at this Jack Vance like style a little bit in short stories before, but what I like about it is that this story to me felt like it fell out of time, right? And a lot of the new fantasy, like you can tell these kids grew up on Harry Potter, or they grew up on you know, and they're trying to tick a lot of boxes in order to like fit market and so on and so forth. And what I liked about this story is that it, like I said, it felt like it fell out of time with this era, but has the skill of a writer that has like honed his craft for as long as you have, and just that balance of old school versus like talent and ability was really good for me. And I'm really excited to hear that you're going to be expanding it, because I think that there's a niche for that old school feel of that kind of fantasy novel, but with a modern political sensibility, which I think is what you bring to those things.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Go on.
I know I'm talking a lot, but I just want to point this out before you tell us more about working on this, is that for me it's exciting because I can look over, I have my John Shirley shelf over there that I have 3 rows worth of books that I've got stuffed over there. And but this isn't like anything that you've done before, and that's really exciting to me. Is that I really think that with the new excitement that you got going on with the Screaming Geezers and things, it feels to me like you're wanting to branch out into this new territory for you by going back to the things that engaged you with fiction when you were young. Is that
Well, sure. There's there's an eternal 12-year-old boy in me, and that's the kid who makes me go to see superhero movies, Marvel movies. Who digs Captain America movies and Iron Man movies, and he's also the kid who likes rereading Sword and Sorcery and books, and I reread Vance's The Demon Prince's books not that long ago with great enjoyment, and that 12-year-old boy in me loved it. He was very, I can escape into that kid, and so I get a lot of energy from him.
Did you reading it as an adult? Did you see workings behind the scenes that you didn't catch when you were younger?
Of course.
Yeah.
I picked up a lot of subtleties and sort of rueful remarks and witty things that I didn't get when I was young. And also the writing craft, I was able to. I cannot help myself, at this point in my life. I cannot help but read analytically, as well as with enjoyment. I mean, it's you have to have that balance as a writer. You got to be able to enjoy the book to get through it, but you can't. But I just feel that writers are going to inevitably analyze the writing that they're reading. So I'm reading Raymond Chandler. I never got much into him, and I'm just mentally dissecting everything and how he does it at the same time as really enjoying the book.
Well, and you're so good at like your Edgar Allan Poe story that you got to finish. You did such a great job of getting into that voice. The way that I think I can tell from the Lovecraft pastiche, from the Poe pastiche that you've done, that you're really good at analyzing like this work as you see it. Like the gears behind it. And I know from my experience in doing the Dickheads podcast is that when I read a book for fun or just, whatever, it's very different from when I've got my highlighter out and I'm reading Ganymede Takeover right now for the podcast, and I have to read it 3 times. It's 3 times slower because I'm paying really close attention to the mechanics behind everything. Because that's what
It's good for you. It's good for a writer. It's it gets imprinted on us somewhere, and we have to be, if you're going to be a writer, you have to be a sponge. But that you don't have to steal their story. You just have to, but you have to be able to pick up riffs, and you have to be able to pick up chops. I mean, it's a lot like being a musician, and a musician learns things. The Rolling Stones learned ever so much from Chuck Berry and Muddy Waters and Jimmy Reed, and then developed their own thing. But they absorbed, and also from soul. They took a lot from soul, but they bring their own take on it eventually. But you still need that to be able to learn these basics. And if you're going to elaborate on them with some freshness, you still have to start with them. And then also the simple, people don't, young writers, a lot of young writers now are not reading enough and kind of lack a basis in grammatical and syntactical construction that should become second nature, and they're reading less and watching more visual media, which is good. I love all that stuff. But they need to read more, more broadly.
I made that.
I think that's my main critique for kind of the outpouring of writers now.
I made the decision at the beginning of the quarantine that I was going to watch less, and I was going to make sure that I was reading at least 120 pages a day. That I had made the decision that I had to read that amount a day before I could sit down and watch a TV show or whatever. And I'm still consuming that stuff, but I just made myself a promise, like I got to have that much a day because I feel like it's important feeding me. And
editing has to be self-editing has to be second nature too for all young writers, and better just accept numerous drafts.
Mhm.
Because, and also the thing is, when you don't just look at it on the screen. For some reason, if you print a thing out, especially if you print it out in a way so that it looks like a book, you'll see all these things and problems in it. You'll say, oh, I really screwed that up, that you didn't see when it was on a screen.
Mm-hmm.
I recommend that.
And we're going to get to your coming novel here in a little bit, but and look, I've said this 100 times. Wetbones is my favorite horror novel that was ever made. And I said we were not going to dive deep into your career, but I learned a lot I've read Wetbones 4 times. It's one of the few books that I've read as many times as it, fiction-wise. But the top 5 horror novels in my canon, which include Robert McCammon's Swan Song, The Sheep Look Up by John Brunner, these are books that I've made a point of going back and reading multiple times because I don't need to hear the story again, but what I wanted to do was be able to understand like why the book worked on me. Like why.
That's right. That's important to do.
Yeah. And for Wetbones, which is and I want to contrast this to the novel that you're working on with the expanding of your Atlantis book, is that John Shirley in 1991 or 1990, when you were writing Wetbones, was a very angry person working on issues through the book.
Yeah.
And what I think is cool is that now we have an artist who, yeah, you're still very angry about things in the world, and we'll get to that in a bit. But I think with the creative freedom that you're getting with the Screaming Geezers, we're getting a chance to see you be able to delve into the joy of your imagination with that. And I really appreciate that because I like the angry John Shirley because it produced one of my favorite books. But I also, as a friend too, I like to see the happy John Shirley writing Sword and Sorcery. So I'm excited for that.
Well, yeah, good. And if it works for readers, then I'm going to be very happy about it. I've gotten some good feedback on that story.
Yeah. So, but speaking of angry John Shirley, we have a novel coming out next April called Stormland. And I'm going to, for those that are watching the YouTube version, I'm going to share the cover here. And Stormland is definitely in a genre that is popping right now, which is what I've written into is cli-fi. And the reason why it's popping so much is because it is so clearly one of the biggest threats that's happening to
we're living through it right now.
And science fiction has to deal with this. We have to deal with this. And I've said recently, like we've got a little bit, because I do a Philip K. Dick podcast, we've talked a little bit about like how would Phil deal with climate change. And he did a little bit because he talks about a warming world and 3 stigmata. And he did do a little bit of it, but that was more the territory of Brunner. But now we're very lucky because we get to get your take on climate change. And I'm sure you have probably had lots of different ideas come to you. Give us the pitch about Stormland. How did Stormland form, and what can we look forward to?
Stormland's been in the works for some years. I first wrote about it for Interzone magazine. I wrote a story called The Kindest Man in Stormland. And ironically, it's an ironic title. The Kindest Man in Stormland is a person who used to be a serial killer. And they found out that most serial killers have something literally wrong in their brains, the theory that scientists do have. And there's a way to fix that. They adjust mirror neurons and they restore empathy and expand his consciousness. And they did this neurologically. And so this guy is an experiment to see whether the impulse to be psychopathic and to be, you know, murderous can be cured. And it works. He's not the hero of the book, but he's one of the most important characters. He's the kindest man in Stormland, ironically, an ex-serial killer. The hero is a former U.S. Marshal who left the Marshal Service after it became privatized, and became, you know, he was angry at all the changes that privatization brought to it. And so he becomes a stringer, freelance detective for a company who searches for missing people. Some of them are missing fugitives and some aren't. And that takes him into Stormland itself. Stormland is the colloquial name for the area around Charleston, South Carolina, which is a place where there, in the future, in the mid-21st century, where there's storms 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, for year after year. There's a little lull between storms, but the storm never completely goes away. There's still something. And it's like one hurricane after another. And then other kinds of nightmarish storm systems, you know, really super involved lightning storms and so on. And so the town is 98% deserted, as you might imagine, and all the area around it. Stormland extends like 100 miles in each direction. It's sort of like the red spot on Jupiter, which is a permanent storm on the planet Jupiter. It's been created by climate change, human cause, anthropogenic climate change has led to this permanent storm in this area. So why would anybody stay there? And so that's the why of it is part of the story. And he goes looking for another serial killer and ends up working with this former serial killer to find this person, and then discovers that Stormland is being used by evil people who are, they're part of the 1% of the 1% of the future, and they're using it as a kind of, well, I don't want to say, you know, give away too much of the story, but there's this social metaphor that's impregnated within the thing that is woven into it. Even though this is a futuristic detective science fiction adventure thing with cyberpunk and sci-fi elements, it's definitely also a statement about you know, the widening of the gap between the rich and the poor in the future. It's sort of related to my TEDx speech that I gave. It's some ideas that you'll find in there when I describe what I felt would happen in 50 years. You can find that on YouTube.
Well,
yeah, it's also in my book New Taboos. I transcribed into it.
yeah, yes, I love that TED Talk, and one of the, and this is, you know, one of the painful things for science fiction writers who write very predictive science fiction. I'm wondering, as things started to, early in this pandemic, when you know, we have such terrible leadership and people are trying to figure out what's going wrong, did you see parallels to your novel Everything is Broken? Because I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a different movement, but especially when, for example, the George Floyd murder happened, and then it just looked like we were so close to the edge with these things, and it's not the leadership that held us back. It's people like having to kind of bootstrap their own like communities because we certainly
Right.
have leadership at the top. Anyways, everything is broken. Like,
The novel Everything is Broken. Yeah, it's about this small imaginary town called Freedom, Freedom, California, and Northern California. That is the whole. In fact, a really large tsunami hits most of the coast of California, which is a really big coast, and does wreckage all up and down. So it's a semi post-apocalyptic book, I guess, because there's so much damage is done. Nobody comes to help this town, and nobody there asks for it because the people who have taken over the town are libertarian, Ayn Rand sort of people, free marketers. So what happens when you have an emergency, and you have all these infrastructural and medical needs and so on, and the town is run by people who believe only in privatization. Suddenly, you know, when you need help, you're not getting it. You don't have a real fire department. You don't have a real medical, you know, community medical services. You don't have FEMA, and so because they're not reaching out to FEMA because they don't believe in it, and so that everybody has to deal with things, you know, do it yourself on their own. And that includes the rise of violent people in the town. You know, there's a gang in the town, and inevitably, they, without any real organized police presence in an intelligent way, you know, they begin to depredate, and it's sort of about the struggle with them and the struggle to survive, despite the fact that the town is run by a corrupt guy who's using libertarianism as an excuse to steal from people, really. Yeah, that's Everything is Broken. You can still find that around. That would be a good movie. It should be a movie.
I agree. Well,
it's very high concept, I think.
Well, what's going on and Everything is Broken that I think people are kind of like missing what's happening now is that it's the critique of libertarianism, because we have the situation now where you have people who are showing up with guns to the state house in Michigan, right?
Yeah.
And they're saying, I don't want to wear a mask. I don't want to do this. I need my freedom. We're seeing where the lack of leadership or like, we're seeing, even though we don't have a libertarian country, we're seeing what just the lack of a one true voice
Right.
in the crisis is leading
Right.
to problems.
Right. I mean, there's such a thing as democratic orderliness, and there's such a thing as infrastructure, you know, arisen in a democracy, and it can have, you know, the conservatives can have their input, and the progressives have theirs, and they come up with something that works, and that used to be what there was, but now everything's getting thrown out, except for a really ugly police presence. You know, they talk about, these libertarian conservatives talk about wanting freedom, and but they have a very much, you know, like we have Trump bringing federal troops in to bully people in Portland and other places, and in Washington, state and in DC, and then we have, you know, and also in 2006, the FBI released a report noting that white supremacists were actively seeking to infiltrate police departments, and nobody really took that seriously or got into it. I don't know how much the FBI followed up. I think they did somewhat, but not enough. And NPR has a piece about it somewhere. NPR News, they did a follow-up in, I think, 2016, and they said that if anything, things were worse, and there were definitely white supremacists infiltrating the police departments, and the death of George Floyd, that the guy who killed him is certainly one of these people. And we have the sick relationship between the Portland police and the Proud Boys kind of people, and all of those people in that. There's just different right-wing racist organizations that they're in relation with. They talk to them on the internet. They go to the same websites, and there are racist police websites. They're like racist police groups that are on social media, and they're closed groups that police go to. And so you have, for example, like there was a sheriff in Idaho, there was one in Idaho, there was one in Nevada, there was one in Florida. That these guys have started refusing to send the police to places where there's support of Black Lives Matter, because they say, oh, you're these people, this BLM people, these Black Lives Matter people are trying to destroy America. Well, I'm not going to collaborate with help by helping you. And so they, the police department not going into some place where there's a problem, maybe there's even a bank robbery, they won't go there because this community supports Black Lives Matter. Well, how did all these sheriffs decide to do this at once? It's because they talk on the internet and they work up these strategies, and people need to get to find ways into those groups and find out what their agenda is and how they're connected. And we need serious police reform in this country. But I think it's kind of a mistake to harp on the term defund the police departments. I think it should have been differently fund the police departments, fund community policing way more. Defund parts of it, like their purchase of military, weaponry and armor and so on. And also, there has to be an effort to methodically go through every police department, investigate who is a white supremacist, who is a white nationalist, and fire them. They have to be rooted out of American police departments completely, because otherwise there's going to be endless conflict. And these guys love that conflict because they think they're helping the big boogaloo come, the race war that they really do anticipate, that they're trying to promote. We have a brown shirt type Nazis in Portland now, gathered as counter demonstrators, supposedly armed and being treated with kid gloves by the Portland police.
And they're all from outside the community, because people forget that the rest of Oregon is not like Portland.
Yeah. I mean, I think probably 60% of the population of Oregon is relatively progressive. They're Democrats, or they're other kinds of progressives. But there's a lot of people. There's a huge number of people spread around Oregon, especially in the rural communities, who are very, very far to the right. And some of them are racist, and we have some here in Vancouver. Those guys, they've started the Proud Boy thing. They're Vancouverites. There's a bar that they hang out in called the Ice House in Vancouver, and right after they had their big demonstration in Portland, they had a big racist demonstration last year. Right after that, they went to the Ice House. There was like 100 of them there, and they still had all their signs, white lives matter, and they have signs. They put up banners. These guys put up banners on pedestrian bridges over the freeway that say it's all right to be white, and that they can say, oh, but we're just being positive about this. We're just saying we feel a little bit crowded. No, that's not what you're doing. You're making a white nationalist statement, and you're just doing it in a cutesy way so that you can kind of get away with it more. But that's what it is, and it's a sort of racial dog whistle, and so we have these people impregnated in Vancouver, Washington here, and we have them in Portland. I think most of them who go to Portland come from other parts, other places. They're from out of state, you know.
Mm-hmm. So let's stay political here for a minute, and then during the Reagan years, it was hard to imagine that we could have anybody worse than Reagan, because he did such terrible things to to progressive values. Then we had the George W. Bush era, and it was hard to believe that we could have anything worse. Now we're 3 years into an undescribably bad, narcissistic tornado of shit with with Donald Trump. For me, like, I think people are underestimating how bad this could get with a guy who refuses to accept that he's getting his ass handed to him in the polls in November. And it's not like I'm a huge Biden fan. I was a Bernie guy. But grow up. Bernie has endorsed Biden. Yeah.
He endorsed him. And why? Because the alternative is fascism.
Exactly. And that's exactly right. And listen, that's the whole thing, is that what I am afraid of is this is Donald Trump worrying about getting reelected again. Like, we're not getting out of this if he's already made jokes about a third term, like in the last couple days.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And so I think, look.
Like his pal Putin, who's changed the constitution in Russia to allow him to become permanently president.
He said he was a big fan of Putin.
And big fan of the guy who just poisoned the opposition leader, the opposition leader, last I heard, was in a coma because he had been mysteriously poisoned like many of Putin's enemies.
So what do you think is the role of because, it's hard, because I just finished a sci-fi novel, and I had to have a president involved in it, and I just decided to ignore the existence of Trump and just write about a realistic president, because this timeline is so insane. And I just decided I had to just ignore that and imagine sanity. What do you think is the role of the speculative fiction writer in this era? Like, how do we have to handle politics? Can we be quiet? Can we be silent? Like,
well, I don't want to say that the writers of speculative fiction, science fiction, should not, write about other concerns. Should need to be talking about our era in other ways. There's scope enough for everything, but I feel like I feel at least a personal responsibility to write about the issues. A lot of science fiction has always been a critique of our time set in other times, and metaphorically it's about our time. And it's also may be speculation, but about the future, but it's definitely informed by concerns about our time. The way if this goes on, it's talking about things that are being seeded now, and you see that in Philip K. Dick a lot. So I think people who can do it well should do it, but it's up to them, of course. I have tried to do it always, but I believe in being an entertainer too, so I try to make it built into the story in a way that's really entertaining. I mean, look how entertaining a book like Handmaid's Tale is, and the show, a very good show, very entertaining, very good storytelling, very gripping. But does it make a political point, and it's just a point about humanity? And oh my God, it is a powerful one. So it is possible to do those things, to have your cake and eat it too. So people like John Steinbeck used to do it. He wrote The Grapes of Wrath, and there's a very good movie, a John Ford, I think, movie of it. It's powerful. It's a powerful story, and it's about the people and the working people trying to have a break in the world, and fairness for those people and for the poor, and showing them as hardworking people who just need a chance. And he was able to do that with a riveting story, and we can do that in science fiction.
Yeah, and I think too, it's funny because when we interviewed Norman Spinrad for Dickheads and Barry Maltzberg, like recently, it was funny talking to them about like all the things that's painful for them to see coming true, things that they hoped they wouldn't see happen in their fiction. Maltzberg talked a lot about his novel Revelations, and Spinrad, talked about the Iron Dream and how he thought, people wouldn't like he wouldn't see as much fascism in the Sword and Sorcery that was coming out, and it was. And I think for you, I would feel like the song called Youth Book, and all the right wing, also the Russian manipulation, and that we, those things, like, and personally, like, and some of the out-of-date stuff, like, I still think is important to see where science fiction writers were at the time. But
the song called Youth I did update it in a newer edition somewhat. I didn't want to lose the flavor of it by going too far with that, but I did some. There's a new edition from Dover Books, and so people can find that. That's the best one. It's the best edit of it. And it's 3 books: Eclipse, Penumbra, and Eclipse Corona. And I think it was fairly prescient. It predicted a rise of neo-fascism in the 21st century, and said that it would come back in Europe and even in Germany, where you'd think it would be the last place. And it has come back in Germany. And there are neo-fascists all over Germany. And I mean, they're not the majority of people, but they're active all over Germany. And do you know where a lot of these guys are learning military skills in a militia kind of way? And where they're learning it? They have been invited to training camps in Russia. And this recently came out that neo-fascists in Germany are going to Russia to study, to be trained militarily, and the camp is run by the Russian military secret service. It comes out. It's another thing they're finding. So that came true, but also things like in my book, like I predicted deepfake videos, which are videos that appear to be just ordinary real life videos, and you cannot tell the difference between those and real life. They're too perfectly crafted, but in fact they are CGI of a kind. It's the new deep fake videos, which are happening, are beginning to be exactly that, and they will be used to manipulate people with fake information. Misinformation is pervading the internet. It's like it's taken over with Facebook. QAnon, for example, the lies of QAnon, pervasive.
Well, I saw recently the deep fake people took the 2009 Star Trek movie and put Leonard Nimoy's face all the Spock scenes. And at first I was laughing, but then I started thinking, well, this is really creepy. There's also one where they took The Shining and put Jim Carrey's face. Yeah,
I
you gotta
know,
look it up.
and I know, and it's going to be more and more realistic. It's you won't be able to tell pretty soon, and people have to be aware that that's coming. That you have to be really skeptical of video images that have outrageous information in them. It's probably not true. If
So,
it seems improbable, it probably never happened.
so we're recording a Dickheads episode on Sunday about the sheep lookup with a panel, and so the last couple of days I've been looking over and rereading the sheep lookup, and I was thinking about that in relation to what we were just talking about with the Eclipse books, with your song called Youth trilogy, which is when you look at the sheep lookup and you look at the genius of what Bruner was predicting, and things like there's a whole chapter in sheep lookup about electric cars, for example, right?
Yeah.
And it's very realistically and well done. And then you look at it and you have to remember that was 1972. The Eclipse books were a product of the Reagan years.
Mm-hmm.
But look at how much they mirror. And then, during the Bush years, we're saying, oh, John Shirley, he nailed it, right? And then we see this cycle where we see what you're doing is you're reflecting on the Reagan years. However, it's that cycle of progression, regression that you're able to reflect in society. And I think that's one of the strengths of speculative fiction is that, and like, look, Bruner's gone. We can't ask him what he was trying to do with the sheep look up. But, I have to ask you, like, how much of the Reagan years, how much of the song called Youth is a product of the Reagan years, and how much does it surprise you how much it reflects today?
It was a little influenced by some things I saw arising. One thing I saw arising, and I think there's a continuity from the Reagan years to our time in that, is theocracy. In this album, Screaming Geezers, I have a song that is all about the new theocracy. Is called Crushed Under a Cross. And theocracy is coming like an avalanche of ice. Betsy DeVos sells you, enslaves your kids to Christ. Christian right is coming, taking over education. And so that I saw that coming in the Reagan era. And there was a and into Bush. Bush was a reborn Christian fundamentalist, and there was a greater and greater relationship between these really extremist sort of right-wing Christians and people in government, and it's Trump is trying to use those people all the time. I mean, he doesn't believe in God. He only believes in himself. He is utterly clueless about religion, but he's trying to pretend that he is a religious person, and he is hooked up with people like this Jerry Falwell Jr. kid and guy, and the more extreme elements of the Christian right. He's got people in his on his staff who speak in tongues. There's a lady like he has an advisor who's she's some sort of fundamentalist minister, and she is she speaks of how water demons, whatever those are going to enslave us, and we must struggle against these particular demons. And she has this whole conspiracy theory about demons, and she is on the president's staff. That's extremely dangerous. That's crazy. And then this lady, this lunatic doctor, what's her name from Texas? This
the demon doctor, yeah.
Yeah, she's the one who was endorsing the very iffy drug that he was pushing, that Trump is pushing. she believes that demons attack you in your sleep, and they have sex with you in your sleep, and then they do that, and they use that to take you over. So she is going to be a guest at the Republican National Convention.
Yeah, well,
that's true. That is, she is going to be a guest there, and people like her. I mean, and plus he is not criticizing QAnon at all, which is full of lunacy and just, you know, far fringe rate craziness and bullshit. Trump is not, because they support him. Yeah. He said they're okay with him because they like him.
Well, and it's funny too, because it's so weird, because these QAnon people, they think he's some hero wanting to save children, when I don't think he would run across a room to save a child. But
this Q, I think, originates with, I think he's run by Putin.
Oh, I agree. I agree. And I think that in the end, years from now, we're going to find out that this was the greatest psyops, like, run thing. I mean, it's so obvious to me now that Russia's behind this whole Trump thing, and really, like, they're going to be laughing at us for years.
They found out that Manafort was just released by the Senate Intelligence Committee,
Republican,
led by a Republican. Mm-hmm. Found out that Manafort, Paul Manafort, a very important man to President Trump, is a Russian intelligence agent.
Yep. And
that those Russians that he notoriously had that Trump had in his office, and they had film of him talking to them about how firing Comey and so on, that those guys are specifically not just, you know, diplomats. They are agents. They're intelligence agents. They're operatives. And he was, like, basically reporting to them. Some people have to stop being naive about it. It's a little troublesome. It's difficult to convince people because you sound like a nut, because you sound like McCarthy or something, like it's McCarthyism. But this isn't communist Russia. This is fascist Russia, and basically it is a fascist theocracy developing in Russia that is trying to take us over.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, John, let's wrap things up a little bit here, but I do want to remind people, if they've made it this far, if they want to follow your projects, we have a Facebook group, John Shirley Fans. Sean and I try to make sure that everything new, you always let us know. We post things there, so when the record's available and when Stormland's available, we'll make sure people know how to find it and get it. And
the record you can get now, but the CD will be in a few weeks.
Yeah, and so and all that stuff's over at John Shirley Fans on Facebook. And
screaminggeezers.com.
Screaminggeezers.com. And I just want to remind people, like, I look at my John Shirley shelf all the time. It's in prime real estate in my library, and what I'm always consistently, like, you know, remind myself is when I look at the titles, when I look at Demons, The Silicon Embrace, Wetbones, Everything is Broken, I keep reminding myself that the Eclipse trilogy, all the different various issues that you managed to talk about or work into your career. So I want people to pay attention, follow this podcast, this blog, because I'm going to have John back. I'm going to get another John Shirley expert, Sean Lawton, on, and we're going to go through all that in detail at some point in the next couple months, I'm sure. But I just wanted to get John on here to talk about the new stuff. We did get into a little bit of it, but, you know, it's super fun for me to think about all those things, because, and it all started for me when I read the first John Shirley thing that I read was Crawlers, but the second one was Demons. And Demons was the one that hooked me, because I was like, this guy is writing a novel about corporations doing sacrifices through giant environmental disasters to raise demons. That's incredible. Like, that is amazing. You hooked me forever with that one. And I just really appreciate it. You're one of the biggest and hugest influences on me. In fact, with my novel Ring of Fire, it was so John Shirley. I told myself in the third act I have to do something that John would never do in the book. So there's a twist in there. If people do read Ring of Fire, I challenged myself to do something that I was like, I got to do something John would never do. And you'd have to read the book to find out. But
okay, now I'm going to go back to it and I'm going to steal that. I'll just
well, because I told myself, I was like, there was a twist in a movie that one time you told me you hated the twist to this movie. And I told myself, okay, if John hates that, that's something John wouldn't do. And
reasonable.
that's a clue. That's a clue. But it was so funny to me because just as I was outlining that book, I said to myself, this is because I've always been influenced by your work, but I knew Ring of Fire, which is an environmental sci-fi horror novel. I was like, you know, this is the, like, you know, John Shirley hero worship novel of mine. But I really appreciate your time, John. You're a total hero to me. And I just keep up the great work. I want to hear more Screaming Geezers always. So I'm glad you guys are going to be working together on Zoom, writing new stuff.
You can hear 2 free songs. You can hear 2 songs just by going to screaminggeezers.com.
All right. I will include that link in the show notes. And people, like, go buy that record, go to screaminggeezers.com. And when Stormland comes out, make sure you get that. But we'll have John back soon. Thank you for joining us today, John.